Hello and welcome to the Leading Lounge. I'm your host, Dr. Justin Dubose. Here in the Leading Lounge, we talk with today's leaders and unpack lessons learned and being learned from a career of leading and communicating in their field. These conversations are designed to be both informal and informative, and we want to equip you with wisdom and tools to empower you as a leader where you are and where you want to be. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 47 of the Leading Lounge. I've got a treat for you today. For this episode and next episode, you get the blessing and the privilege of listening to a great conversation that I was fortunate to have with Brigadier General retired Ferd Irizarry. I met General Irizarry we were doing a training at my unit, and he was there, and he and I got to talking and texting and found some common connecting points. And so I was so happy when he agreed to let me sit down and pick his brain on leadership and on wisdom. So this is going to be a two-parter. Episode 47 is going to be part one, and then episode 48 is going to be part two, because there was so much there that I needed to break it up into two episodes. But if you're from a military background particularly, then what General Irizarry has to say will certainly be good for you. However, the principles that he talks about in a really thoughtful, really reflective way, that's evident that it's deep experiential wisdom that he's accumulated over the years, you're going to be able to take those principles and apply them anywhere, no matter where you are. And he's incredibly humble, so he didn't share with me and you most of what his career accomplishments are, but I'm going to put a link in the show notes in the description. If you want to go read his military bio, you can. But one of his last assignments before he retired in 2015 was he was the deputy commanding general of the U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, SWCS, where they train our special ops soldiers. And so his experience is deep. It's high level. Career span 40 years, and I'm just so very grateful that he was willing to sit down and share some of that wisdom with you and I. So be blessed from this interview, and stay tuned for part two, which will come out in our next episode here in just a few weeks. So here it is. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Leading Lounge. I'm blessed to have a special guest with me today, retired Brigadier General Ferd Irizarry. Sir, thanks so much for taking the time to sit down and talk with me and share some knowledge and some wisdom and experience. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. It's an honor to be here with you. Thanks for reaching out to me. Thinking
yeah, you're welcome.
To say.
Well, sir, typically the first question I start with everybody, it just gives you the opportunity to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got to where you are today. So can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your professional journey that got you to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I started off ROTC scholarship student, and when I got my bachelor's, I applied for graduate work, and because of that, and I needed some money to survive, I managed a 7-Eleven from midnight to 8, and I joined the Maryland National Guard. Actually, managing a 7-Eleven on Green Mountain 33rd in Baltimore, Maryland, is a real, leadership challenge as those things go. But for a graduate student, working from midnight to 8 is actually quite good because it doesn't interfere with any classes. So that part was great. And a little side note on that one, I never had a bad day. So I did that for a whole year, never had a bad day. But part of that is because it turns out that you pay for coffee and some of those other drinks in a 7-Eleven, or you did, by the cup, not by how much coffee you actually consume. So I told the police they could have all the coffee they want in my store, as long as they bring their own cups, And I got to tell you, hey, my parking lot looked like, precinct headquarters sometimes. I never had a bad day. So I did that. I did some graduate work, but the National Guard experience was very, very interesting. So I had jobs while I was doing that, and then I came on active duty as an infantry officer. Did that for about 14 years or so. And then I was at the National Training Center when Desert Storm hit. And as an infantry guy, I thought I missed a big dance. And so that's when I transferred to Civil Affairs. And they picked me up. And then I spent the rest of my career, basically another 20 years, doing civil affairs stuff. I got to tell you, I loved the career I had. I mean, I spent a lot of time with reserve units, and I spent a lot of time with active duty units. I spent a lot of time on soft missions. So I got to see a little bit of everything. And I probably have a fonder, I guess you could say, or a better respect for reservists and the National Guard guys because I spent so much time working in those communities. Which leads to my own little truism, I guess you could call it, and that is when you meet a reservist, you don't know who you're talking to. All you know is their pay grade. So
very true. That's very true. I've told people that. I said I've been talking to specialists, and come to find out they had MBAs and they were running their own companies and all kind of stuff.
Funny you mentioned that, right? So I was at a brigade exercise one time, right? And I was sitting down and I was having lunch with a bunch of soldiers from this brigade. And so I said to them, "Hey, listen, if you were sergeant major for the day, or what would you change?" And this one specialist said, "I would give enlisted guys in the National Guard and Reserve promotion points for the civilian job." And I go, "Whoa!" And he goes, "Listen, sir," I already lead a small landscaping business. I got 20 guys. I am the platoon leader / platoon sergeant. I have every responsibility you could possibly imagine any lieutenant would ever have. And all of that leadership experience, I have to demonstrate every single day. I can't get one promotion point for that. And somebody else who goes and gets, community college and gets a couple of, gets 2 or 3 credit hours of something is getting promotion points, and I don't get zip.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Oh, it was fantastic. Of course, over the years, I've thought about it and I go, how would you actually go and, quantify that though? I mean,
right.
So, I mean, which jobs would give a guy 10 promotion points and which jobs would give him 5 or, and then how would you validate that?
Sure. Yeah. That is where it gets tricky.
It does get tricky. It's one of those classic, devils in the details kind of thing. But I have to tell you, I never forgot it because I think it's completely legit. you know?
No, it is. I think so. So had you been in, did you say 14 years by the time Desert Storm hit? Like what was your time frame that you were in the military?
Well, so I actually, if you ask that question, it's easy 40 years because I mean, I was a 4-year scholarship student in 1975. Right. And so if I had flunked out of school, I would have been in the Army in 1975, And so I went from 1975 to 2015. So basically my career spanned 40 years,
Okay. So did you ever envision, go back to 1975, that would be the next 40 years of your life would be in uniform in some fashion?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all, But I got to tell you, I mean, I'm sure it's not for everybody, for me, but it was good for me because, I mean, I basically loved the variety. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about it. You're constantly learning, you're doing new things, so that became very alluring. I mean, moving from post to post, going to different countries.
Sure.
It kind of captured my imagination. And even when the kids came along, so I have 2 children, I have to tell you, I didn't find, I should say this correct, put it like this. I found it easy to convince the kids or convince it wrong. It's easy to communicate with the children that their dad was doing something important. So I had seen my uncle who was in the Air Force, and he used to write back to me from Japan or wherever he was. And so what I did every single Sunday when I was overseas, especially in the 90s, on Sunday, I would write a postcard back to the kids. And I had a little brown book, address book, and I had all the kids, all the cousins and the nephews. And so my 2 kids would get a postcard, and I went through the list of every cousin and nephew, and I would just kind of pick 1 or 2 every single Sunday. So I'd go to mass, after mass, I'd go write postcards and then go back to work. And even to this day, I can go and see some of the nephews and the cousins and a little pink ribbon around sticking postcards. I sent them from all over the place, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, for me, it was very important because I wanted to make sure the kids knew that the sacrifice they were making was a big deal.
For sure. No, that's a great idea. It's I'm sure there's modern versions of that, whatever it would be. You could still do postcards, but some way to keep in touch and communicate would be cool. But no, that's a great idea.
I would say, you know, I think though, you know, an email or a text message doesn't have the same.
I agree.
This doesn't, you know, I mean, when the postcards, I had to, when you come right down, I had to physically go out and find postcards that I thought were appropriate for kids.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And so I had to have this little collection, which forced me to go do something, you know, and then get stamps and write, you know, the addresses. I mean, it's different, you know.
Sure, yeah, and the handwritten sentiment and everything else.
You got it. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's a big deal like that.
Yeah, so, totally agree. Well, I appreciate sharing that overview. As we go through these questions, I'm sure more details from those 40 years will come out. But one of the focuses of this podcast is on leadership. So I wanted to ask you. You had the fortune, I guess I'll call it, of going from, you know, ROTC cadet Irizarry to Brigadier General Irizarry. So you go from, you know, company level leadership as a lieutenant to strategic level leadership by the time you retire. Mm-hmm. And I'm always curious, people that have these kind of long arcs of leadership, you had to learn along the way. You mentioned that, you know, always learning. So in those leadership transitions, what would you say were the most important skills or some attributes that you found yourself needing that in a previous role, that role didn't require from you?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So I think one skill that you start with, and I would tell anybody, is really a big deal. Is it comes from the concept of management by walking around. And so I would say to anybody, one skill that you basically modify slightly, but you keep the whole time, is you got to get out from behind your desk and go find your people. There's no other way to do it. I don't care if you're a staff person or whatever. You got to go out and meet your people, you know?
Yeah.
And you can't replace that. There's no substitute for that. You can't dial it in. Sure. It really means, even in the biggest organizations, it means going down one flight of stairs and go finding a guy and just sitting right next to him and saying, okay, what's going on? What are you up to? You know, what are your challenges? It is the only way to really empathize with your team, you know. And the other thing I think that I've heard different versions of this, but you have to learn what your people are doing, right? So it's not, I know some people subscribe to, you know, if you're a good manager and a leader, you don't have to know what everybody's doing. That doesn't really wash completely with me. I think at some point you really do have to understand what people are doing. And I say that because how can you give effective guidance if you don't understand what's supposed to be done? You know, sure. I mean, so even if you're talking to a machine gunner and you haven't dug a machine gun fighting position, you're probably not going to be giving very good advice or instructions, or advice is the wrong word. You're probably not giving them good guidance to where to sight the machine gun if you've never actually tried to do it. You know?
Sure, yeah.
So, and I think that goes all the way up. I think if you're a platoon leader of a vehicle, you ought to drive it. You ought to get into, you know, the TC hatch. And if you're somebody who's, you know, doing a lot of staff work, like I did a lot of that, you have to write an annex at some point. You know, you have to kind of grind out some of that so that you can actually, you know, talk from a position of strength, you know.
Sure.
So that leads to what I think is maybe the most enduring principle over the years, and that is, I think every single principle of leadership comes back to one core tenet, and that is leadership by example. And so you can come up with any laundry list you want, but if you're not living that laundry list, in my opinion, it's irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
And people will snuff it out. They'll sniff it out right away. You know, I mean,
sure.
You tell everybody to have integrity, but you don't. I mean, that It just doesn't work,
Right.
You're telling everybody to be fit, but you're not fit. You tell everybody to show up on time, but you don't show up on time. On and on and on. If you basically create some sort of executive privilege for yourself, I would say those principles and tenets will fail if you don't live them.
Yeah. That's interesting that you mentioned those, because as you were talking, I was thinking none of those skills require any education. I mean, it's not like you go to some great school to learn that you need to know your people and lead by example.
No, you're exactly right. But it's for me, leading by example is unbelievably fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
And you see people struggle with it all the time. I mean, they, especially guys who get more and more senior. I mean, they think they can put out a concept and guidance, but they're not that person.
Right.
And I think we're normal animals. If you tell me one thing but you behave the other way, I know what I'm believing. So I think leadership by example is a very big deal. And the other thing I think that is a very, very big deal for U.S. soldiers is to what I would call protect the moral high ground, right? And it's something that every religion basically believes in. Being a moral being, being morally sound. But for soldiers, I think it goes a step further. I think you really have to behave like a moral, principled individual, and once you compromise that, you have a big problem on your hands, So you really have to, in my opinion, you have to behave with integrity. You have to speak with integrity. You have to be, demonstrate empathy and respect for others. I mean, I sort of understand that we have to create rules to force people to behave correctly. But I've always also believed that if you're a good leader, you are doing those things. You reward people for, working hard and performing well. It doesn't matter. You don't care if it's a woman or what, if the guy's got, one arm or three arms. None of that matters. It just doesn't matter. If you're a solid, leader, then there's balance and mutual respect in your approach. And nobody has to tell you any of that stuff, because you're already doing it, and you're punishing poor performance or correcting it, and you're rewarding good performance and using that as an example, and you don't care where it comes from. And, so I often thought that some of this debate about, like taking care of families, right? You can tell me to do that, but you don't have to tell me to do that.
Right.
I already know. All I have to do is think about my own family. And I already know that if my family isn't in a good place, it's going to constantly distract me. So as a leader, I already know that I've had a soldier with a family problem. We need to take care of that because I'm not getting full measure out of this guy. And it could be for the most self-serving reasons. I just want him to be the best soldier ever. I don't care about his family. But I know that if I don't care about his family, he's not going to be the best soldier ever.
Right. So that's a great point.
And I think it's a component of a lot of what we, over the last, and I'm talking about not the last couple of years. I mean, my entire military career, someone has thought that there was something that needed extra emphasis and throw a regulation out there or something, I mean, like years ago, there used to be a sentence in every officer's efficiency report, OER, that talked about his wife's participation in the military. So you had to have a sentence addressing your wife.
And it was important enough that it had to be in your OER.
It had to be in your OER, right?
Right.
And then, fast forward a couple of years and it's like, don't ever write that in there. She's not in the Army.
Right.
So,
yeah.
But same thing. I mean, the military is just one gigantic team. And if it's going to work well, all the parts have to work.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think going back to the original question, I think if there was one thing that kind of traveled all the way through, or the couple, one would be you have to go out and meet your people and walk around. You have to set a good example. And I think you have to be a moral leader. There's no two ways
Yeah.
about it, you know.
Those are great. Let me
Yeah.
ask you, sir, did you pick those up in your upbringing, or was that kind of you developed kind of those three tenets based on the Army, or like where do you think you picked those up as kind of the most important?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think leadership by example. I mean, that was, I think, instilled in me and a lot of us as lieutenants, you know, and part of that was, my generation basically had a lot of Vietnam vets, you know, and these guys were, I mean, they were pretty intense, to say the
Hmm.
least, you know. And so they were, whenever we, like even as ROTC cadets, we were going to go do a patrol or do an ambush or whatever, they were really doing ambushes. This was not,
Right.
you were definitely going to Vietnam with this guy in AP Hill
Hmm.
and, and
Yeah.
doing an ambush, I mean, there was no fooling around. And he was living that with you,
Right.
it wasn't somebody talking to you saying, you shouldn't do that. It's like, no, he's on patrol with you, you know.
Hmm.
So I think, that generation was all about that, you know.
Yeah.
And while I'm on this subject of Vietnam vets, just for 1 second, I've asked over the years to speak, basically welcome home the Vietnam vet, those kinds of things, and you know, you get these read aheads that give you a little bit of script to make it easy for you to kind of just grab something off the public affairs website that they publish for general officers to go to a ribbon cutting or whatever, uh, and I'll never forget that I got one of these invited by a great director of the VA. He said, "Hey, can you come over and talk to the Vietnam vets? We're going to be giving out little pins, you know." And I read the whole, speech they had prepared, which I really was grateful for. I didn't have to worry about it. And I read it and I went back and I said, "Hey, Betty, I'm not going to use this, right?" She goes, "Well, that's okay. I don't care. You can use it if you want or not. Just, can you come and talk?" I said, "Yeah, I'll be there." And when I got there, I said, "Hey, listen, we've got this all upside down. I shouldn't be apologizing for what happened and all of that." I said, "My focus to you is I want to thank you for creating the army we have today."
Mm.
So while everybody is zooming in on how, woe is the Vietnam vet, and everybody treated him badly, I'm like, forget that. I mean, okay, I got it, but that's not the story. The real story is they basically stepped up and said, we're not going to let that happen again. We're going to create the greatest army that the planet has ever
Hmm.
seen. Now, that's, in my mind, that's what they deserve credit for. We should be, and this is a little bit awful, but to say, but I know we get fixated on World War II, the greatest generation, and all that, But to tell you the truth, for our generation, that's not the greatest generation. The greatest generation for us were the Vietnam vets
Mm.
that basically said, we're going to have the right kind of training facilities. We're going to have the right kind of equipment. We're going to have the right kind of structure,
Yeah.
practice the right way. I mean, Fort Irwin and Fort Polk and all those places, they're all the product of Vietnam vets saying we need a place to properly prepare for war, you know,
Mm. Yeah.
uh, all of that. And so I think it's, kind of, it gets lost when you have the two subjects kind of align with each other, where, folks talk about the greatest generation and we're all super happy and proud of what happened in World War II. And then Vietnam, everybody thinks we lost it, and then we treated the Vietnam vet terribly. And personally, I want to change the narrative. It's like, wait a minute, World War II, great bunch of guys. They fought for about a year and change, did a great thing, you know. But let me tell you about
Hmm.
the Vietnam vet.
Yeah.
you know,
Well, and I know they're all older now, but every vet that I've met that was actually trained by Vietnam vets all said the same thing, that it made for the best training, it made for the best soldiers, it made for the best environments, which
seriously,
is part of what you're saying.
yeah, no, I mean, World War II vets are not my drill sergeant. They're not my, ROTC professor of military science. That's not who those guys are. The guys that
Hmm.
I grew up with were all Vietnam vets, and it's a completely different mindset too,
Yeah.
so I want to see if there's something else I wanted to just kind of cover as a general intro. Moral high ground and leadership, though, is a big deal. That is a big deal. So let me see if there's something else here that I really wanted to. Oh yeah, so the one thing that going back to this idea of what changed over time, right? The one thing that I never would have paid attention to as a lieutenant, but I definitely had to pay attention to as I got more senior, and that was national policy. So, and I don't think it should change. I don't think a lieutenant should ever really worry about it. But as you get more and more senior, U.S. foreign policy is a big deal. And and one of the key issues that Americans, I don't think, appreciate is we may be the last country in the world that projects power or has the capability of projecting power, right? So our army, most armies in the world exist to defend the borders or are there for civil disobedience.
Right.
I mean, in Sudan, they're, or Mali or Senegal, they're not worried about getting attacked.
Right.
I mean, they're defending their borders, and then they're worried about something going sideways in the capital after an election. Right? We're one of the few, if not the country left in the world that can actually project power and has a doctrine and a policy to actually project power. And what that does, in my mind, it means that as you become more senior in the United States military, you definitely become more conscious of U.S. foreign policy. So I remember going to Bosnia, and Madeleine Albright basically said the Serbs were wrong. And that presented a really big problem, because when we showed up, we wanted to say, you're all schmucks. They're going to treat you equally. You all belong in jail. You're all evil. And so we're not going to show favoritism. You're all awful, right? And I think they were really comfortable with that, as a matter of fact, right? But when the Secretary of State says that one side is the good guys and one side is the bad guys, it creates a big problem. And, we have to be sensitive to that. That's a big deal. At the senior levels, that becomes a really big deal.
Now, what was the level that became an issue? Was that like colonel level, or was that after you were you had a star?
So here's the answer really is, it was when I became a civil affairs officer.
Okay.
When I went into SOF, because basically when you go to in special operations side of the of the military, you really are performing at levels that are completely exceed what your rank is.
Right.
So it's really more a question. Like a typical captain would never go into an embassy, but a PSYOP captain would go into an embassy. A typical major doesn't go into embassies or talk to ministers of defense or at any level. That just doesn't happen. But especially when you're an Army SOF like CA or PSYOP, for example, I mean, there are NCOs that are in Bogota talking to the country team about how to do, counter drug operations. So to answer your question, I think it happens very quickly when you're in special ops, because it's more a function not of your grade or rank, but of what you're expected to work at.
Right.
Whether you're supposed to, you know what I mean? So if I'm supposed to work at the embassy level, then that's that's the kind of skill I have to have. And if I go to Bogota or go to the Philippines and I don't understand U.S. foreign policy, I'm worthless.
Right.
Basically, I remember going over, when Abu Sayyaf was running around in the southern Philippines, and I was, I think I was a major, and, we went over there and we're talking to the Minister of Interior of the Philippines. And before I went over there, I went to the Filipino embassy in Hawaii and sat down with not the ambassador, but, one of his, folks. And we went through the country plan for the Philippines. And there's a whole chapter 11 was on the Southern Philippines. So before I even left to go to the Philippines, I had read the president's policy for Southern Philippines.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. Your average 04 is not going to be in that environment.
No, not even going to think about it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, so here's another one, that thing that I've grown really fond of over the years. I was doing this as a lieutenant, but I didn't understand how important it was. And that is, I almost always draw a map of where I'm going, hand draw it. And I got really good at it in the when I went to the Balkans, because I wanted to basically understand how ethnic groups shifted and where they were on the ground. And so by drawing the maps of, like, going back, a couple hundred years, I all of a sudden started to memorize exactly what was going on and where the tension was on the ground. Right?
Wow.
So fast forward to today, when I work with PSYOP and CA units, right? And we start to do, let's say, a Korea problem or Indo-PACOM problem, I always have them draw a map of the area by hand. And people think it's nuts.
How did you did somebody suggest that to you, or how did you come up with that idea? Because that is a great idea.
Well, here's what I wanted to learn, right? So it's kind of funny, I remember, especially when the late 90s, people would say, hey, I can give you everything you ever wanted to know about Bosnia on a CD or on a DVD. Mm-hmm. And I always said, no, thanks, because I need to read about it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And when you're on the ground, you realize, well, especially like an Army guy, the ground is everything.
Yeah.
So I don't know what gave me, where the epiphany came from, but I just started doing that,
Yeah.
That's some of my notes from the Bosnia or Afghanistan and all this. It's, me handwriting notes, right? But I'll give you something else too that I found is really kind of, kind of like a TTP for us. All right. If you only have a little bit of time and you have to learn about a foreign culture, right? And you're going to go someplace, pick your favorite place, Peru or Lebanon, right? I would tell you there is one place to go which will make you an instant success, right? And there's one section of this place. If you go there and read books there, you will have a comprehension of a culture that you wouldn't get from an Encyclopedia Britannica. And where is that? It is the children's section of a library. So if you read about a country in the children's section of the library, you will read the picture of the country that the people really carry in their head. And you will find out what food is safe, because the children's book is a safe book, right?
Yeah.
So it'll tell you exactly what colors are good, what holidays are right, what food is right, what songs, right? And so if you meet somebody and you've been to the children's section of the library and you go to a foreign country and you say something like, hey, can you explain? I don't understand. What's going on with this piñata thing, right? Boom. You've taken this guy and he is 8 years old, right? Maybe 10 years old. And he's with his family and he's just reliving this wonderful moment in his life, right? And if you talk to him about holidays, or the person talking about holidays, or how does the song go, I am telling you, you're going to be operating on a completely different plane than anybody who's read, all of Leon Uris's books and all that jazz.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm telling you right now, you can read Balkan Ghosts all day long, and some of these other tomes of culture, and you may know something, right? You go to the children's section of the library, you are armed for battle. You have got all the ammo you need, right? And it's a wonderful quick read too, and you're gonna love it too. By the way, I mean that's the other part. You go there and all of a sudden you're learning about dreidels and all that kind of stuff. And you can read many books and never have one single sentence in in a more adult novel dedicated to a dreidel. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. I would have never thought about that, but you're right, and it's so succinct, and it's like there's a communication principle that's basically if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you really don't know it well enough. But same kind of idea. It's like if it can be communicated in a children's book, it's probably pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that goes for food. I mean, think of America. I mean, people would chat up Thanksgiving and the 4th of July.
Mm-hmm.
So a foreigner who comes and knows about the Thanksgiving and 4th of July is in a good place.
Yeah.
And talks about fireworks, talks about cowboys, talks about turkey. I mean, all of that.
Yeah.
Boom. Hey, you know
Yeah.
something about me,
Yeah,
So,
that's true. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.